For Real News is sponsored by assholes like you, so pay up, motherfucker.
Socialism has never worked. It's become a truism repeated by right-wingers and people who just don't know much about political theory. It could be something someone tries to say when you tell them you voted for Bernie Sanders. Psh, Bernie Sanders, don't you know that socialism has never worked? Many don't know much about the history of socialism, or even really understand what socialism actually is. They hear the word socialism and they think of authoritarian regimes like the Soviet Union or North Korea, or even worse, they might say, hey, socialism doesn't work, when they're having a conversation about someone like Barack Obama, implying that Obama is himself a socialist. Now, it should go without saying that Obama is not a socialist, but this actually has to be explained to some people. This is true regardless of whether you are for or against socialism or communism or capitalism or social democracy. I am not.
What David Pakman does here is he sets himself up to weasel out of any real concrete accountability. Because as you'll see, he uses the most vacuous and squirrely definition of socialism that he can possibly get. Something that has no hard definitions. He starts using, you'll see in a second, he starts using these definitions that are so nebulous and amoebic that socialism could mean things that are entirely not socialistic. And then he tries to make this case that it's ridiculous to think that Barack Obama is a socialist. Now, I think it's possible to claim that he's a bad socialist, that he's a hypocrite, he's a champagne socialist, which is the way most socialists in the world are. They claim to have these pro-worker ideals, but they don't live up to them by any means. It doesn't mean that he's not a socialist. A real socialist is somebody who believes in a lot of the principles of collective ownership of the means of production and income wealth redistribution and forced equity and state planned economies, things like that. So there's degrees to which one can be socialist, but to say that because Barack Obama is not a socialist, because he's been a failure at many of the things he's done, and he's compromised himself by giving in to Wall Street on many things, I think is a stretch.
Not a socialist, but I can only understand that if I actually know what socialism is. So let's begin there. Defined by a textbook, socialism is the collective ownership of a society's means of production. Means of production could be non-human resources used to produce things of economic value like real estate or farmland, natural resources, equipment, buildings, infrastructure, roads, and collective ownership of these things, meaning workers or the public own them. Some define socialism as a system by which social equality can be achieved. In this broader way of thinking about it, socialism could mean any kind of socialistic philosophies or attitudes or tendencies, or a system that combines orthodox socialist practices with other constructs like capitalism. For instance, you could say that some Scandinavian countries are socialistic by modern standards, not because they have a system where the government or workers own everything.
This is where Pakman, he uses a very liberal license when it comes to hammering down what socialism is and what makes one a socialist. Scandinavia, a lot of those countries, especially Sweden, were much more socialist in the past, and they've moved away from it. But he tries to make it appear as if, they exhibit socialist policies, and therefore they are socialistic. That's what he says. It's one of those weasel words. He doesn't offer the historical context that when Sweden went hardcore socialist economically back in the 70s and 80s, it led to a downturn in their economy, and eventually they abandoned many of those policies. So, he wants to go around and claim that people are misusing the idea of socialism, when what he's really doing is he's denuding the whole idea of any historical and empirical trials You know, there's so many examples. He said at the beginning that it's right-wingers that based on their preconceived notions of socialism, they'll bash anything that is mildly socialist sounding and everything. Well, some of us know people who have lived under socialism. Some of us have lived under socialism. A lot of Cuban Americans came here, and they've lived under socialism. So who are you to say why people have those viewpoints on the ideas of socialism?
But because they have a system where there's a relatively greater amount of intervention by democratic government to protect socialistic ideals like egalitarianism, civil rights, equal education, environmentalism, and the prevention of abuse by actors in the free market. These are capitalist societies, and they're definitely not realizations of socialism as defined in a political science glossary, but these are manifestations of socialistic inclinations, especially when compared to what goes on in many other developed countries. Socialism is an extremely broad umbrella term to describe a wide range of political, social, and economic systems, movements, and ideas. Let's explore where socialism comes from, some of its variations, and how they functioned in society. Some elements of socialism have ancient roots. Ancient Buddhism taught that the individual and all other living beings are interconnected and interdependent, and that all humans should be treated equally and with kindness. People often draw parallels between socialism and Buddhism, and many say that Plato's Republic first articulated the notion of a socialist state, a state that aims to solve government action through higher taxes and redistribution of resources.
So I don't know what he's talking about with Plato because I haven't read Plato, but the notion that Buddhism leads to a socialist society is plainly just false. Maybe there's Buddhist philosophical ideas that are used in socialism, but if you go to virtually any society that has Buddhism as its main religion, you could talk about traditional Korea and India, and I believe India was the birthplace of Buddhism, although it's not majority Buddhist. But you can go to any of those countries in Asia, and socialism is virtually, it has nothing to do with Buddhism. The two are as unconnected as spaghetti and Slim Jims. Go to a country like Thailand, one of the most well-known Buddhist countries in the world, or you could go to Laos. The socialist regimes there, they crack down on Buddhism. A lot of Buddhist ideas, such as nonviolence, are rejected by these socialist regimes because ultimately, although the ideals of socialism are hypothetically leading to social harmony and peace, what happens is that in order to achieve that, you need a massive amount of coercion and fear to intimidate people from causing any disharmony.
There are lots of other aspects of Plato's Republic that don't at all align with modern socialism. Socialistic ideals are seen being portrayed in the Hebrew Bible, which in many places says that people should be treated equally and that we should be generous to the have-nots. The book of Leviticus says you shall not oppress or exploit your neighbor.
So he's using the Bible, which, I believe in the Bible, and I might not believe in it the same way as you do, but you can't overlook that there are massive portions of the Bible, including the book of Leviticus, that deal with how to treat your slave. It's true. That's the way it was. This was a society that believed in literal slavery. I don't know if you could sell your slave, but you could own a slave. Okay, people could sell themselves into bondage. There were captives of war. There's other aspects of it, including in Exodus. Let me look up the verse. The verse Exodus 23:3 says, "Do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit." Okay, so there's certain aspects of the Bible that are blatantly not socialistic, whatever the hell you want to call it. The Bible and all world religions are largely not socialistic. I mean, there's certain indigenous religions around the world that they have more of a collective belief system than they do an individualistic one. But if you want to use those as the antecedents of socialism, fine. This is not an antecedent of socialism, not Judaism and not Christianity. He goes into Christianity in a second.
Love your neighbor as yourself. Deuteronomy says God enacts justice for orphans and widows, and he loves immigrants, giving them food and clothing. That means you must also love immigrants because you were immigrants.
Okay, if you want a clarification what that means, this does not mean somebody who has immigrated to where you live, such as somebody from Kenya or Honduras that comes, an immigrant in the biblical context. And this is why, a lot of Jews, I'm Jewish, and Pakman should know this, but he doesn't really mention it. The translations of the Bible, remember, much of the Bible, many versions of the Bible were translated from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to German to English, or various different combinations of such. So the word immigrant in Hebrew is ger, and a ger could mean an immigrant, and it could mean a convert, a religious convert. So, and when it does mean an immigrant in this context, it is somebody who has immigrated in order to accept upon himself the laws of the land. Okay, so for example, they have to renounce their idolatrous practices. That's the context of the Bible. This is take it or leave it. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to support it, and you don't have to. You don't have to agree with it. But what Pakman is saying here is blatant lies. It has nothing to do with socialism. This is the idea that only socialistic societies, as he calls them, not socialist societies, but socialistic, can be tolerant of the immigrants and love orphans and widows is ridiculous. It has nothing to do with it.
Don't take advantage of poor or needy workers, whether they are fellow Israelites or immigrants who live in your land or your cities. From Ecclesiastes, it is God's gift to humankind that everyone should eat and drink. From Psalms, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Now, this might get awkward.
Okay, so before he goes on to bash Christianity, which, to be honest with you, I don't see why he doesn't look at the many aspects of Judaism, which is my religion, and first of all, there's the slavery issue that I brought up. Second of all, there's the issue where you can take captive women at war and force them to marry you. You can own handmaidens. You can make women into your not just to be have multiple wives. In the Bible, there were many instances when men would have concubines. Those were women that were exclusively they were sexual partners exclusively, and that was their only function, or they would also be servants. So is that a socialistic practice? And the Bible doesn't do it. If you look at the actual Bible now, later in Judaism, in the later post-biblical eras, these were eliminated because of extenuating circumstances. It wasn't a moral imperative to eliminate polygamy, eliminate concubinary, or whatever you call it. It was a necessity of the times. It was an economic necessity, so far as I've been explained. Why doesn't he go into those aspects, which are they're not just economically unequal, they're blatantly sexist, if you want to take it that way. This is why I think that people who adapt their religion to modern progressivism eventually lose their fucking minds, because it just doesn't make any sense. You have to let your religion, exist in the proper context of how it was drafted. There's It's the same thing that they do with the Constitution. They call it a living, breathing document. That's the same way that progressives look at their religion. And that's how socialists look at it. That's how you got liberation theology, which is what he's about to go into. That's what has ruined the Catholic Church for many people.
For anti-socialist Christian conservatives, but the New Testament is also chock full of socialist themes. Jesus advocated that all people, including governments, should provide for the poor and distribute resources according to people's needs. Some quotes from the New Testament: all who believed were together and had all things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all men as every man had need. And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess, and give to the poor. When you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. Distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. To take another religious example, in Zoroastrianism, the prophet Mazdak the Younger, in 6th century Persia, promoted the implementation of social welfare institutions and collective ownership of property. Many ancient religions acknowledge the social nature of...
So once again, he's taking societies that, and these are all ideals. Okay, remember, this is the same as... What's our criticism, the people who don't believe in socialism? Let's not call us capitalists yet, because I am a capitalist, but not everybody who doesn't believe in socialism is a capitalist. Some people just, they're agnostic about economics or whatever. The reason that we don't believe in it is that it's theory, and that the theory goes to shit when it's put into practice. And that's the experience that has been in every society. So these are great and fantastic aspirations on the part of, the early Jews and the Christians and the Zoroastrians who were in Persia. But all of those societies, they had slavery, they had sexual slavery, they had many practices which in modern days socialism would, any socialist from Karl Marx and onward would describe as barbaric. So they can claim that these are socialist sentiments from verses if you really interpret it the way that Pakman is doing, which is, some of them, the one from Acts, I think it did make a certain amount of text. First of all, he's not providing any context anyway. The Bible, when you take verses and standing on their own, you could pretty much twist them any way you wanted, and I've found ways to do that. Sometimes when I'm mocking somebody who's really going off the deep end on one verse. But, this is blatant, cherry-picking from the Bible. And first of all, it does not represent society in those times at all. And to be honest with you, it doesn't represent the sentiment of the Bible as a whole. Remember that in Exodus, or not in Exodus, in Deuteronomy, God distributed the land to the Israelites, but after that they were free to sell their land. They were free to rent their land out. It wasn't an issue. This was not state ownership of the means of production. So he's really stretching the entire definition here.
Humans, whether on purpose or by accident, and promoted equality, caring for the needy, and common ownership. The term socialism itself wasn't used until the early 19th century in Western Europe by philosophers and social critics like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Henri de Saint-Simon, and Robert Owen. At first, the word was used not to describe any one political system, but as an abstraction, a philosophy that societies could or should operate to serve the collective, as opposed to just thinking about the individual. This was in the wake of the French Revolution, and in large part a reaction to the poverty and inequality that was growing out of the Industrial Revolution. And then over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, there were many different philosophies that branched out of this to form separate socialist intellectual movements. This is where the idea that socialism means any one thing is dispelled. When someone says socialism has never worked, be suspicious that they're thinking very narrowly and really not taking into account.
So he's been showing a lot of people, like I think one of them, some of them are obvious, Marx and Engels and Robert Owen, and I think the person on screen I don't know, but Roberto Gramsci, I think his name was a few frames ago. You can go through each one of these people, and none of their ideas has been empirically successful.
Account how many different types of socialism there really are, and how different types.
Yes, Chomsky and Zizek, two assholes, with zero charisma. That all they do is they spew hot air all day. That's what they do. Those are the examples of socialism working. No, you have to bring an empirical example of socialism being successful, and stop saying that oh you're being too narrow-minded. Well, you're being too broad-minded, in my opinion.
Of socialism have manifested, or they might just be completely clueless about history too. Many of the flavors of socialism have some overlap and aren't necessarily mutually exclusive movements. One of the first schools of socialist thought was utopian socialism, which in itself is sort of an umbrella of different theories, but in this way of thinking, socialists have posed that capitalists, factory owners, and others would voluntarily hand over the means of production to workers. They believed that this would be accomplished by way of education and conversations between socialists and capitalists until all the means of production were controlled by the collective and decentralized democracies. Many utopian socialists drew from...
Okay, so that's one type. We can already say, I think you guys can agree with me, no, that hasn't worked. There has not been a single nation where capitalist oligarchs and billionaires have given over their means of production to the workers voluntarily.
From Christianity to form the rationales for their views. Utopian socialism has often been criticized for focusing too much on theoretical models of how the socialism might work, and not enough on how it would be achieved, hence the name utopian. Then there's Marxism. Now, many people refer to Marxism colloquially as communism, even though communism can actually describe an array of different systems, some of which don't even involve a state, which I'll touch on in a second. But Marxism is definitely not merely synonymous with socialism the way many people think. Marxism is a type of socialism, or a type of communism, something very specific. And it's not just an economic system, it's an entire philosophical worldview and a way of analyzing politics and society, economics, history, religion, art, whatever. And there is much, much more that can be explained about Marxism than I'm able to cover in this video, but as an ultra-simplified overview, political Marxism is centered around class struggle, revolution, and Marx's historical theory of materialism. Marxism advocates a revolution wherein a society's means of production are taken by force, rather than by reform or negotiation or slower forms of transition. The means of production will then be controlled by a proletarian state, which in theory will lead to an egalitarian, stateless society that governs itself without coercive institutions. Really important point here. This is not what the Soviet Union or its, quote, communist successors achieved or were working toward.
Okay, scorecard. Let's keep track, okay? He's saying that the Soviet Union and its offshoots are not Marxist because, for whatever reason he's about to get into. Yet he doesn't mention a single successful actual Marxist state. So again, the scorecard is 0 successful socialist regimes.
Despite their pretenses, Bolshevism, Maoism, and the like are inherently right-wing, totalitarian perversions of Marxism. In direct contrast to Marxism and other forms of state socialism is libertarian socialism, where there's an emphasis on having a state that is either small and decentralized or completely non-existent. One version of libertarian socialism is anarchism, which is a set of socialist movements that...
This is going to get very awkward soon when, he start. I mean, the example he's going to show is plainly one of the worst examples you could give.
I don't really oppose the idea of hierarchies and authority altogether, especially the state. Really, no variation or stage of anarchism involves government by definition, and almost all schools of anarchism see any type of hierarchy as either unnecessary or unethical in any kind of human interaction, a boss at the workplace, a leader in a social movement, whatever the case may be. Now, within anarchism, there is anarchist communism, which seeks to abolish not only the state, but all markets, money, and private property in exchange for communal ownership of the means of production and decentralized grassroots direct democracies. There's anarcho-syndicalism, which can be thought of as a sort of extension of anarchist communism, where the means of production are controlled by confederated trade unions called syndicates. This type of anarchism actually...
So essentially what they would do is contradict their own principles, because they don't believe that there should be a boss-worker relationship. But who leads the trade union? The trade union can't function without a hierarchy.